Since Traoré came into power, Western media have consistently said that the security situation in Burkina Faso has worsened. They said that the insecurity had worsened because Traoré kicked French troops out of the country. However, the citizens of Burkina Faso, including those in the diaspora, do not believe this narrative. They see the efforts that Traoré has put into outfitting the Burkinabe military and combating insecurity. And they also see the results of Traoré's efforts. It's no wonder then that the Burkinabe citizens in the diaspora raised 31 million CFA Franc to support President Traoré's peace efforts in the country. This is remarkable. But what is the implication of this move? Let's find out. Combating insecurity requires huge finances, and prior to the coup, the Burkinabe government depended on aid from the West to run the country. It was reported that more than half of the country's budget depended on aid. However, when Traoré came in, the West cut off aid to Burkina Faso. But President Traoré has not allowed this challenge to weigh him down. His decisions and impact in Burkina Faso have pulled the strings of Burkinabe citizens across the diaspora to support his vision financially. According to the reports, 8 Burkinabe diaspora communities have heeded President Ibrahim Traoré's call, exemplifying international solidarity for securing Burkina Faso's national territory. These communities include Manchester City in London, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and communities across East Africa. Together, these communities collectively contributed 31.3 million CFA francs to support the nation's peace efforts. The official handover ceremony was held earlier in January at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ouagadougou. It was presided over by Foreign Minister Karamoko Jean-Marie Traoré. Remarkably, the diaspora in Saudi Arabia stood out with a contribution exceeding 8.2 million CFA francs, supplemented by in-kind donations for internally displaced persons. Meanwhile, the Burkinabe community from Garango residing in Italy made a substantial contribution of 7 million CFA francs, and a collective of Burkinabes living in East Africa, including Burundi, Comoros, Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania, raised 7.7 million CFA francs. This mobilization by the Burkinabe diaspora comes amidst a sensitive security situation, as authorities continue their efforts to restore the country's territorial integrity. It highlights the government's ability to leverage its diaspora's resources in the fight against insecurity that has plagued Burkina Faso for years. This is remarkable, and it is a testament to the commitment and efforts of President Traoré to ensure the return of peace in Burkina Faso. The truth is that the citizens of Burkina Faso can see what Traoré is doing. If he was a wasteful leader who cared only for himself, the citizens of Burkina Faso and the diaspora would not be patriotic enough to send financial support. This method of contributions from Burkina Faso is what is being used to run the country. It would interest you to know that in 2024, Burkina Faso was able to raise 175 billion CFA francs under the Patriotic Support Fund. This fund was set up by Traoré's administration in January 2023 to respond to emergencies and support the national counterterrorism strategy. According to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, the amount represents a mobilization rate of more than 116%, given that the target for the year was 150 billion CFA franc. This is mind-blowing. The government explained that tax levies are the main source, with 77.1 billion CFA francs, or 46.3% of the total. The Local Development Mining Fund comes in second with 24.2 billion CFA francs, followed by deductions from public salaries with 23.3 billion CFA francs and levies on telecommunications with 20.7 billion CFA francs. The ministry also added that voluntary contributions and deductions from private salaries remain marginal, representing 3.5 and 3.6 billion CFA francs respectively. Voluntary salary transfer closes the ranks with 1.4 billion CFA francs. All these contributions to the fight against insecurity have paid off. Western media may say otherwise, but according to the Burkinabe media, the Burkinabe army has been able to recover 70% of the national territory. This was made known by the Burkinabe Prime Minister Jean-Emmanuel Ouedraogo. He said that the fight against terrorism and the restoration of territorial integrity remain the top priorities of his government's general policy. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel so that you can get more videos like this. Speaking to members of the Transitional Legislative Assembly, Ouedraogo paid tribute to the country's combat forces and disclosed that 70.59% of the national territory is currently under government control. The current rate, which is subject to periodic assessment by the intelligence agency, stands at 70.59%, he said. He further noted that significant efforts are being made on the ground to sustain and improve this trend. Ouedraogo further affirmed the government's commitment to bolstering the strength and firepower of the combat forces on the operational front. To achieve this, the administration plans to optimize intelligence capabilities to enhance the efficiency and frequency of operations aimed at reclaiming and securing the national territory. Now, as a result of this victory, it was reported that about 1 million internally displaced persons have returned to their homes. During the National Council for Emergency Relief and Rehabilitation session, members of the organization discussed the reintegration of over 1 million internally displaced persons, IDPs, who have returned to their homes following successful military operations against terrorist groups. The session, chaired by Minister of Humanitarian Action and National Solidarity Commander Pelagi Cabre, recognized the bravery of the Burkinabe armed forces in enabling the return of these individuals. As of December 31, 2024, a total of 1,010,136 individuals from 165,375 households in 397 locations have returned to their homes. The government is now focusing on implementing endogenous solutions for sustainable resilience to support the long-term reintegration of these returning populations. The United Nations system in Burkina Faso, led by Resident Coordinator Carol Flores Marexniak, has pledged its commitment to supporting the government's efforts. Through a humanitarian response plan, partners are providing emergency assistance to nearly 3.7 million people. The successful return of over 1 million IDPs marks a significant step forward in the government's efforts to combat terrorism and restore stability and security across the country. This is good news, and we applaud the determination of the Burkinabe army under the leadership of President Traore. The insecurity might not have been eliminated, but the return of over 1 million people to their homes shows that the Burkinabe army and the military government are committed. The amazing thing is all these are happening without the help of the West. France's so-called counter-terrorism efforts, which lasted for 10 years in the Sahel region, could not achieve what Traore's military had achieved. Instead, the insecurity that started in Mali became worse under France's watch, and it eventually spread to every part of the Sahel. However, the success achieved by the Burkinabe military proves one thing. Africa doesn't need the help of the West. Africa doesn't need Western aid. Africa can survive all by itself. The continent has the people and the resources it needs to stand and prosper. This is what the military government of Traore has proved for everyone to see. Now, a few days ago, the US president issued an executive order cutting aid to foreign countries. Since then, analysts have said that African countries will be the ones who suffer the most from Trump's executive order. However, that is a wrong notion. In our opinion, Africa will be better off without Western aid because financial aid from the West has caused more harm than good. It has painted Africa as a needful victim that doesn't have anything to offer and cannot help itself. This is one of the reasons why the West looks down on Africa. Africa needs to break free from this victim mentality and start building itself. And one of the ways to do so is to stop collecting Western aid. Now, aside from the fact that aid is a tool of Western exploitation, the fact is that Western aid has made African countries to be dependent on the West. This dependency is what has made some African leaders to sign away African resources for peanuts or in exchange for wealth and power. This dependency has also stalled innovation and destroyed local businesses. It has weakened the local markets and dampened the spirit of entrepreneurship. Take, for instance, the corn that was shipped by the UN to Kenya in the form of agricultural aid. A portion of this shipment ends up on the black market, where the corn is dumped at extremely low prices. But what do you think will be the effect of this on local corn farmers? Local farmers may as well put down their equipment right away because they will not be able to compete with the UN's World Food Program. And because the farmers go under in the face of this pressure, Kenya would have no reserves to draw on if there actually were a famine next year. It's a simple but fatal cycle. It's the same in the textile industry. In 1997, 137,000 workers were employed in Nigeria's textile industry. By 2003, the figure had dropped to 57,000. Why? Because so-called good Europeans pack their old clothes into a bag and send them to Africa where they are sold at very low prices. And Africans would prefer to buy these European clothes than clothes made in Africa because of the cost. This has been the cycle for a long time. However, African leaders, such as the military leaders in the Sahel region, are showing that Africa needs to do better. The fact is that aid has done more harm than good to Africa. It has made Africa to be seen as a helpless continent that cannot do anything to help itself. But it's time to change this. Africa can do without foreign aid. If there was no aid, Africa would be forced to find ways to create revenue by itself. It would force Africa to produce and trade with fellow African countries. It would force Africa to improve on infrastructures. When there is no free food that will be sold at low prices, farmers will have to go to the farm. Africa will not fizzle out without aid. Instead, Africa will come out stronger, just like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are getting stronger. The AES member countries have successfully proven that they can survive without Western aid. As we said earlier, after the coup occurred in all these countries, there were concerns raised by some Western institutions that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso will not be able to survive economically and financially. But these countries have shocked everyone. Not only are they surviving, but they have also engaged in several development projects. And a few months ago, these countries announced that they have paid a significant amount of their debt. Burkina Faso, for instance, revealed that it has been able to pay $4.79 billion of its domestic debt since the start of 2024. This announcement was made by the Prime Minister of Burkina Faso, Dr. Apollinaire Guillaume de Tambela, during the 21st National Government Private Sector meeting held in Bobo-Dioulasso on November 22nd to 23rd, 2024. This is a significant step towards Burkina Faso's pursuit of financial independence and economic stability. Speaking at the meeting, the Prime Minister emphasized that the repayment was not just a financial milestone, but a deliberate strategy to boost national economic activity and support local businesses. He also noted that the repayment demonstrates the government's commitment to economic sovereignty by prioritizing domestic obligations over dependence on external creditors. He further noted that efforts are currently underway to mobilize resources to settle the remaining debt. This is remarkable. As of June 2024, the Burkinabe domestic debt had risen to 4.1 billion CFA franc from 3.9 billion in December 2023. This reflects a 5.4% increase in domestic debts, which currently accounts for 57% of the country's total public debt at 7.3 billion CFA franc. These figures highlight the heavy burden on the country's finances compounded by the ongoing security crisis. This crisis has forced the government to turn to the financial market to fund its public investment programs. However, despite this, Burkina Faso has been able to successfully mobilize funds from the regional market. Burkina Faso has been able to raise over 208 billion CFA franc and attained investor coverage rates as high as 220%. This simply means that despite the challenges faced in Burkina Faso, investors have strong confidence in the country's ability to manage its finances and fulfill its commitments. Interestingly, the funds raised are being channeled into critical investments in infrastructure and basic services. By focusing on these areas, Burkina Faso is laying the groundwork for a self-sustaining economy that can withstand an external shock. This approach is in stark contrast to the debt-dependent strategies often imposed on African countries by international financial institutions like the World Bank and IMF. Perhaps this is the reason why President Traore made the decision to reject financial assistance from the IMF. You see, as of 2023, Africa's debt amounted to about $1.8 trillion. But what's interesting is the fact that as high as this figure is, it is actually lower than any world region. It would surprise you to know that Germany, a country in Europe, has a debt stock of about $2.9 trillion, which is far greater than all the debts of African countries put together. However, the problem is that African countries' debts are burdensome and put a lot of pressure on their economies because they are mainly owed to international rather than domestic lenders. In contrast, developed countries such as Germany, the United States, and the United Kingdom usually borrow from domestic creditors. And the difference between these two is that external lenders prefer to lend to developing countries in their own currency or international hard currencies, such as the dollar, while domestic lenders lend using the country's local currency. More than 30% of Africa's total debt is owed to so-called development organizations like the World Bank and IMF, whose loans usually come with certain conditions that African countries must fulfill. According to reports, these loans from the IMF and the conditions attached with them have contributed massively to the bad state of most African economies. This is why Thomas Sankara, in his critique of debt, stated that debt is neocolonialism, in which colonizers have transformed themselves into technical assistants. Under its current form, controlled and dominated by imperialism, debt is a skillfully managed reconquest of Africa. And this is why during his reign as president of Burkina Faso, Sankara rejected loans and assistance from IMF and World Bank and even tried to persuade other African countries to collectively refuse to pay their financial debts to their former colonizers. Hence, Traore believes that countries that are indebted to these organizations will never achieve economic independence. This is the reason he made this bold decision, and it demonstrates his dedication to prioritizing the well-being of his people above all else. Aside from interfering in the economy of African countries, receiving loans and aid from the IMF and World Bank also opens the way for these organizations, which are headed by the West, to interfere in the political affairs of African countries. This interference has created a breed of African puppets who act in the interest of the West. However, Traore has been quite vocal against the interference of the West in African matters and has made it clear that he will not tolerate any form of Western intervention in his country. President Traore has decided to follow Sankara's footsteps by turning down financial assistance from the IMF and borrowing from the Burkinabe domestic creditors to fund development projects. In this way, the government will be able to comfortably pay the debt without pressure from the economy. This is why Burkina Faso's domestic debt increased and why it has been able to pay 4.79 billion of its domestic debts. This is remarkable and brilliant. Now, as we said at the beginning, Burkina Faso is not the only AES country that has focused on paying off its domestic debt. As we said, Mali has also begun to pay off $332 million of its internal debt. This news was made known by the Malian economic minister, Alouseni Sanao, on Mali's state television. The economic minister acknowledged the increasing challenges that Mali faces in recent times and in terms of debt. This is why the government has made provision to begin to offset some of the debt. Although the economic minister did not give the overall figure for the size of Mali's debt, he revealed that between now and the end of the year, Mali would have paid $332 million of its internal debt. Now, given the fact that Mali is no longer receiving Western aid, it means that Mali is paying off this debt with funds generated internally. As we said at the beginning of this video, this is remarkable and is a testament to the fact that Africa can do without Western aid. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment and share.